Welcome, friends, to the United Lodge of Theosophists. Today's topic is ages and sages, and it very quickly grew into a nearly unmanageable scope. So this may end up being part one. But to begin with, we've talked a lot about cycles, how everything proceeds in a cyclic path that at its return is at a slightly higher level, and that it constitutes a spiral. And it so happens that certain sages appear cyclically during these ages to witness the end or the beginning of a race or civilization during which a principle of man or a period of learning is begun or ended. So we'll just dive right in as much as is possible. So these are basically the 4 ages, and I have a handout describing the immensity of years that they are. Pass it. Some of these ages are given exact numbers, but really it's said in several places in the Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled that they are approximate, that HPB came at the time of the 5,000 year cycle after Krishna, but it doesn't fall exactly on a specific day of the year because the cycles, I learned, blend. As one is ending, another is beginning, and there is a little period of blending. So the Golden Age lasts the longest, 1.7 million years. And the Silver Age lasts 1.2 approximately. The Bronze or Copper Age is 864,000 odd years. And Kali Yuga, the age we are now in, according to the Secret Doctrine and the Brotherhood of Adepts, for which Madame Blavatsky was the mouthpiece, indicate, as do the Hindu records, that we are in the Iron Age, and it lasts 432,000 years approximately, and about 5,000 years has elapsed since the beginning of the Iron Age, so we still have 427,000 years to go. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the significance of the yugas, the ages. The 4 ages signify not only periods of time, but are allegorical allusion to the races of men. And we know that there are 7 races, and there is 7 sub-races. So we very quickly get into more numbers. 7 times 7, 49. So we are the beings who have been through the Golden Age. We are the beings who go through the Silver. We all are continuously incarnating and learning through a process of descent into matter and a reascent to spirit. And after a Kali age comes a Golden Age. So it does make a circle, even though it's listed there. Successive races are destroyed and replaced by others. Gold, the most brilliant and precious of all metals, symbol of purity, qualifies the first race, as Madame Blavatsky talks about in the Secret Doctrine. They were ethereal. They were basically the Dian Chohans who incarnated for the sake of humanity. The men of the second race, those of the silver, are already inferior to the first. Inert and weak, all their life is no better than a long and stupid infancy, it says. They disappear. The men of the Bronze Age are robust and violent. The third race, those were the giants that are listed in the Secret Doctrine, the Rakshasas and so forth. Their strength is extreme. They had arms made of bronze, habitations of bronze, used naught but bronze. Iron, the black metal, was yet unknown at that time. And the fourth generation or race is with Hesiod, the Greek, the heroes who fell before Thebes. In the Secret Doctrine is to be found that the fourth subrace was in Kali Yuga when destroyed, the Atlanteans. And she says it's not, we cannot object on the grounds that we are not that race are in Kali, for each race goes through the various ages for itself. Hence, all the former races, both the primary race and the subrace, go through all four periods from the golden to the iron. So even though they're an allusion to each race, what's trying to be illustrated here is that there's layers of symbolism. There's allusions to, we're in the fifth race, it's allusions to the previous races, but yet also each race goes through all four ages. So we have to think of it and use our intuition as much as possible to try to correlate all these levels of symbolism. It must follow from this, and such is the oldest teaching on the subject, that at one and the same time races may be on the earth, running each for itself through one or other of the periods. Some might be in the Golden Age and others in the Iron Age. At present, it is admitted that the Aryans are in the Kali Yuga, but certain childlike races are not so. Within the present 5,000-year period, we know that races have absolutely finished their Kali Yuga and gone out of existence. This happened to that which ruled a part of the American continent, and hence for them in particular, their Kali Yuga must have begun earlier than ours did. The Hottentots also disappeared during our memory. This method of considering the subject will clear it up, leaving only to be settled for each race the period which they are in, or the beginning and ending of it. And as said, the Aryans began the Great Kali Yuga about 5,000 years ago. Later on, she gives the example of the American Indian, who were in their Stone Age when contact was made with what's considered the fifth race, and that meeting altered, I mean, it sort of, they affected each other, and they are pretty much gone at this point. And again, these cycles are very, very large, and there is, as we're seeing, some blending, some overlapping. It's not always begin like a race, end with a stopwatch. There's continuous cycles going on. Here's where she says, when the Europeans came to America, the Native Americans were in their Stone Age in some places, using stone hammers, spears, knives, and arrows. Even in cultured South America, the priests used stone knives, etc. We, however, had gone far beyond that. The Red Indian of North America would have remained wholly in the Stone Age had we not altered it to some extent, while we proceeded as, unfortunately, instruments for their annihilation. Therefore, in our own period, we have examples of two races being in different ages, while living at the same time on the globe. There are numerous pages in the Secret Doctrine showing that when a new race, whether a sub-race, a major one, etc., comes in, it does so while many of the old race still exist. The one gradually rising in development while the other is deteriorating. They shade into one another as night does into day, until at last either night or day predominates. Just like dawn, there's a little bit of light and it gradually increases to, the full sun, and then darkness is in obscurity, and vice versa. These blending periods also, applies to the ages, and they're called twilights and dawns, sandhyas, and I forget the word, but we'll come back for the twilight. Sandhya, I think, is the dawn. And the twilight of one will be the dawn of the next. And how were all these figures determined? From the Zodiac, the most all-encompassing system of symbols that every race, every continent, every people has been aware of, because it's the same system that's been distributed throughout the globe by the teachers. So, are there any people on the earth today in a golden age? There are no such in our sense of the races, but in the moral and spiritual sense, yes, there are such people. Here in the world, and this was written in 1933, there are millions of people. America went through the Great Depression, but there were millions of people who were unaffected, undisturbed, and they led peaceable, tranquil lives, protected. Are they not in their golden age while the rest of us were in the Iron Age? There are many questions like this answered in questions and answers to the Ocean of Theosophy. And we'll go through a few of them, and then we'll proceed to the sages and how they fit into this scheme. One of the reasons that the Native American went out while the Europeans were colonizing this area is that they're a relic of the fourth race, the Secret Doctrine says. And so we still see remnants of the fourth disappearing as the fifth is rising. As with also the Chinese are a relic of the fourth race, and will be, even though they are very population-wise numerous, Madame Blavatsky says that they are doomed to be leaving the globe. Aren't we all these races? And the answer is yes. That the first race is the second race is the third is the fourth is the fifth, and so on, since we're all one mankind. But the egos themselves are divided into those classes of 7 times 7, the 49. When we speak of the cycle of the first race, it doesn't mean that the egos in it are distinct from the rest of the egos, but merely that in the golden age, or the first race, the highest class of egos have the direction of the forces. In the silver age, not the highest, but the next highest class of egos have the direction of the forces, and so on. Now, when the lowest class of egos are in the saddle, so to speak, the highest class egos would be in another phase. So, during the Iron Age, It is the lowest class of egos that are directing the forces. That's why it's dark. That's why it's such a difficult time, because the light is the most obscured, and it requires one to sort of work against those forces, because in the Iron Age, all the selfish and iniquitous acts of all of humanity is in the astral light, which reflects back upon us. So it's very difficult for an individual or a group to not be swayed by it, because it's all around. But it is possible for any individual to rise above the age in which they're in, and to be an exemplar of a golden age type person. Now here's an interesting example about Plato. Plato is a great illustration, since he was recognized during his life as the greatest philosopher in all of Greece. Yet when Plato was a middle-aged man with a very high reputation, the king, or the tyrant as they called him, of Syracuse, sent to Athens and invited Plato to come over and to teach his son how to be a real ruler, how to rule rightly among his people. So Plato left Athens, he goes to Syracuse, and Dionysius has an interview with him. And he said, "I don't want you to forget that my son is a king's son, and you must deal with him accordingly." Plato said, "King, there is no royal road to knowledge." The king was very dissatisfied with this and dismissed Plato. So Plato is on his way back to Athens, leaving Syracuse, and mind you, he was a world-known philosopher then. He was on a boat which was shipwrecked. The captain, the crew, and Plato were landed on some inhospitable shore, and the captain, in order to raise money to pursue the voyage, sold Plato as a slave. But when the man who bought Plato found out who he was, he fell on his knees and begged Plato's pardon, supplied him with funds, and sent him back to Athens. The point is, do you suppose that Plato was a bit different when he was walking in the groves of the Academy at Athens, talking with his students, or questioning Socrates? How about when he was called to Syracuse to become the tutor of the king's son? How about when he was a passenger on the ship and it was wrecked? When he was sold as a slave? When he came back to Athens, honored of all people? Do you suppose that made a bit of difference to Plato? No. Would it to many of us? Probably. Because Plato was more sort of advanced than the age in which he was living. He wasn't swayed by good or bad circumstances. He was able to rise above the pairs of opposites, so to speak. Now, if we'd been put through the same course of events, we should have thought that we were in a cycle of enormous prosperity when we were invited to Syracuse. And we should have treated the king's son very respectfully. When the ship was wrecked, we should have thought we were in a cycle of the very worst kind, until we were sold as a slave, and then we would have raised our voice to high heaven and cursed the gods. So the example is saying, don't we see that this is all in the mind? It's hard for us to realize that, yet it is possible for a man so to detach himself from the body while alive that so far as he is concerned, it is as if he had no body at all. It is possible for a man to so detach himself while alive from everything we call pleasure and from everything we call pain that they no more affect him, as if he were dead and out of our spheres of existence. What does that mean? It means to cease to identify the self with a capital S with the body. To cease to identify self with either the good side or the dark side of life. Self is not the good side or the dark side. Self is neither prosperity or pain. Pain and pleasure come from a misidentification of the self with what's being experienced. When that identification is cut off, the body is here if we choose to use it. Pleasure and pain are here if we choose to experience them. Otherwise, we are outside their sphere of influence. It is difficult for us to get this view, but that is the very purpose of our struggle on earth. A little bit more information on these ages before we get to the sages is that on this very subject, HPB says in Isis and repeats in the Secret Doctrine that in the Golden Age, the normal length of a human life is 400 years. In the Silver Age, 300. In the Bronze or Copper Age, 200. And the normal lifetime for the Iron Age should be 100 years, even though it has been significantly less than that at various times. Currently, life expectancy is on the rise. So she asked the question, what have we done to the length of normal life in Kali Yuga? Mostly it's been lowered. And these numbers of years are all related to the thing I handed out that has the various ages of mankind. So 100 years is supposed to make up our life, just like on the back side of this, the various ages and pralayas. 100 years is made up of, a year, and 360 odd days make a year. So on the back, we can see 360 days of a mortal make 1 year. And Brahma, or the sort of the collective of all being, has a similar life. 100 years is his lifespan, 360 odd days make his year. What is it in terms of our comprehension of the figures, the numbers make up a day of Brahma? Brahma has a day and a night, and they were equal in length, and they are like 8,640,000,000, and 360 such of those days and nights make up 1 year of Brahma, and this is the period of what's called a Manvantara, 311, I don't know, trillion, 400 billion, 1, 2, 3, 3 more zeros. So it's an immense period of time. I guess we get the idea. And the whole 360 days and nights make a year, and then 100 years is the age of Brahma, and that makes up a Mahakalpa. The 4 ages together constitute a Mahayuga, and it goes into all the details, how they all figure out, and each student can look at that when they have time, and since we have more to discuss. And it gives the figures from the beginning of cosmic evolution all the way up through the astral, mineral, vegetable, which is supposed to have elapsed. Now, as these are about these ages are also refer to races, and the races come about in round. I have another bit for you, is that for every round, because these are manvantaras, the time between two manus, we have to remember that it sounds like it would be sevenfold because there's 7 rounds and 7 races. But there's a root and a seed for each manu, for each manvantara, so for each round. So the first is the root manu, and then on globe A, and then it ends with a seed. So in other words, there's the root, there's the growth, and then the flowering, and then the seed at the end of it. Just to give you an idea, and of course they've been named, and our progenitor is Vaivasvatu Manu, 4th round, 4th root Manu, for whatever that does. So these are pretty much exoteric figures, but she says in the Secret Doctrine that those who are initiated know the exact figures and are very familiar with them. But some of these things that I handed out of these years, these yugas, Satya Yuga, the Golden Age, purity and innocence, virtue reigning, these weren't known in the West until HPB told us. They have been completely forgotten to the uninitiated. So it's an immense system that she's brought forward for us to understand. Okay. Okay, so what about the sages? How does that fit into this? Basically, at the beginning and ending, it was said that there's sort of a witness to the age, like an inauguration or a witness to the ending of it. And in the Secret Doctrine, it says that there are 10 avatars. And an avatara is the appearance of any deity upon earth, but more particularly the incarnations of Vishnu in his 10 principal forms. Give me a minute and I'll indicate what they are. And as I said at the beginning, this topic very quickly gets so immense that it takes a while to assimilate this system. But it's obvious that reading the Secret Doctrine that she, borrows from the Hindu. She compares it with the Chaldean, the South American. That is not something anybody could have concocted of their own. That these are records which belong to all of humanity. So an appearance of an avatar is like a direct incarnation of deity. Can come through woman or can appear without a normal birth, just supposedly assuming drawing matter and forming a physical vehicle. So there were 10, and this relates to all those periods of time. The first one is Matsya, the fish avatar. And then I won't put all the Hindu names, but just to give you an idea, they're symbolized by an animal, and that probably relates to what happened in that cycle. Tortoise, boar, man, lion, dwarf, And then Rama, who was a hero. This is Parasu Rama, as opposed to Ramachandra. We're going to talk about Rama, obviously. Ramachandra was the hero of the Ramayana, a physically perfect man. And then there's the Krishna avatar, which is Krishna, that we know of. And he was son of the virgin Devaki, one formed by God, or rather by the manifested deity Vishnu. And then Gautama refers to Gautama Buddha. We're getting towards our own time period. And the 10th, who has not yet occurred, it is expected in the future, when Vishnu appears for the last time, he will come under the form of the horse. And the name of this avatar is Kalki, the Kalki avatar. And different things always show him mounted on a white steed, on a white horse. And the horse is the envelope of the spirit of evil, and Vishnu will mount it, invisible to all, till he has conquered it for the last time. So, to go back as far as, I could gather enough material to say something meaningful about, is to go back to the 7th incarnation of Vishnu. And these avatars are considered incarnations of Vishnu. And Vishnu is that preservation principle in the Trinity. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, the Trimurti. Vishnu is the preservative aspect. And so this is what's happening during that preservation, so to speak. So Rama is came at the end of the Treta Yuga, the second great age, for the special purpose of delivering mankind and the gods from the iniquities caused by Ravana and the Rakshasa king. Rama was known as the mightiest of those who carry arms, inasmuch as he was the only one able to bend the mighty bow of the god Shiva. So with the help of Hanuman, the monkey god, who was his helper, he accomplished the purpose of the gods, which was the triumph of good over evil. It was a struggle between Rama, the first king of the divine dynasty of the Aryans. So, and Ravana symbolizes the Atlanteans. So it's sort of like the triumph of the highest egos in the Aryan race conquering what had become the lowest sort of evil tendencies of the fourth race, the Atlanteans. The 8th appearance of the avatar Vishnu was Krishna. And Krishna is represented as the 8th. In this aspect, he is the spiritual teacher, the embodiment of wisdom. But as with the other saviors, stories and allegories have been woven around him in great abundance. It is said when he died in 3102 BC, the Kali Yuga began, the Iron Age. So he was the witness on the scene, and with his disappearance, with that light being withdrawn, came the darkness of the Iron Age. Krishna, as the teacher in the Bhagavad Gita, represents the Logos, and Arjuna typifies man, the lower man. The 9th is considered Gautama Buddha, and the Buddhists say he's going to come back as Maitreya. But I think that's really the same as the Hindu system of the Kalki avatar. There are so many correlations that we may say that we are the same, that they are the same. So just to return to our age, we can see that there's all these correspondences. But there are some questions about the age that we are in. We should know as much as we can about it. The teachers of truth know all about the Kali Yuga, but they don't mistake the present century for the whole cycle. The older times of European history, for example, when might was right and darkness prevailed over Western nations, was as much a part of this age from the standpoint of the masters as is the present hour. For the Yuga, to use the Sanskrit word, in which we are now had begun many thousands of years before. And during that period of European darkness, although this Yuga had already begun, there was much light, learning, and civilization in India and China. The meaning of the words present age must therefore be extended over a far greater period than is at present assigned. In fact, modern science has reached no definite conclusion yet as to what should properly be called an age, and the truth of the Eastern doctrine is not yet accepted, but it will be. So Kali Yuga is the dark age. Its approach was known to the ancients, and even though it's dark and it's a difficult struggle and it lasts for less time than the other ages, the silver lining is that more can be accomplished by the individual during Kali Yuga than during any other age because of its acceleration. It's a descent, and a descent is always quicker than an ascent. Like going down a hill, you gather momentum. So incarnations they last less time, they're more frequent. So one has the opportunity in, say, just 3 or 4 lives to accomplish a much greater work if one can hold to a sacred mission to better oneself for the sake of humanity than in any other age. Has the Kali Yuga, the age in which one lives, any effect on the student, and what is it? The sage responds, it has its effect on everyone, but the student, after passing along in his development, feels the effect more than the ordinary man. Were it otherwise, the sincere and aspiring students all over the world would advance at once to those heights towards which they strive. It takes a very strong soul to hold back the age's heavy hand, and it is all the more difficult because that influence, being a part of the student's larger life, is not so well understood by him. We sow seeds of thought and physical tendencies in ways we don't presently comprehend, but they affect us in our next lives and from our previous lives to now. Many powers once possessed are hidden so deep as to be unseen, and struggles against obstacles constructed ages ago. Further yet are the peculiar alterations brought about in the astral world. As was mentioned, it is like a photographic plate and a reflector, and has become the keeper of the mistakes of ages past, which it continually reflects upon us from a plane to which most of us are strangers. In that sense, therefore, free as we suppose ourselves, we are walking about, this article says, hypnotized by the past, acting blindly under the suggestions thus cast upon us. And that is why Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, in one sense. people acted blindly, impelled by the age, thinking they were right. But there is ways to mitigate the age. All causes begun now bring about their effects more rapidly than in any other age. A sincere lover of the race can accomplish more in 3 incarnations under Kali Yuga's reign than he could in a much greater number in any other age. Thus, by bearing all the manifold troubles of this age and steadily triumphing, the object of his efforts will be more quickly realized. For while the obstacles seem great, the powers to be invoked can be reached more quickly. Some of the mitigations have been triumphs of science, all that is directed towards the cure of disease. It's not material progress that constitutes an age. It's the overall vibration of the thoughts and acts of all of mankind. Are there any people on Earth today in a golden age? There are no such races in our sense, but in the moral and spiritual sense, yes, there are such people. A couple more questions and then we'll open it up. Oh, an interesting thing is that an avatar like Krishna comes, with his passing came Kali Yuga, comes in a decimillennium, every approximately 10,000 years, an avatar of his illustriousness. So we often confuse the clock with the event, it is said by HPB. To say that a meeting is at 6:15 p.m. does not mean that the clock causes the meeting at that hour. The statement is that Kali Yuga, which lasts 432,000 years, began with the death of Krishna at midnight between the 17th and 18th of February, 3102 BC. Thus, it was 5,000 years later that we see, halfway through the decimillennial cycle, that we see HPB come. And according to Isis, we may expect to see Krishna again. Now, 5 is half of 10, 4 is half of 8, 3.5 is half of 7, and so on. And here we have a clue to the many things in connection with cycles. Every single digital number is capable of being made the central point of the cycle. That is, there can be a dual cycle, a triple, a quadrennial cycle, a cycle of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the point is that a being as great as Krishna came at the 10,000 year, at the 5,000 year, a being like a bodhisattva like Madame Blavatsky came. But if we divide that up into, half of 5, we're going to see another teacher of humanity. Maybe not as advanced, but still one having the interests of the amelioration of humanity and universal unity will come bearing the message. And thus we see some of the lesser teachers that stand out in our historical period, like Muhammad, Jesus, etc. So we can always, it's kind of an interesting thought process to divide it up into thirds or quarters. And if we were the adepts, we would see exactly how all those teachers and the cycles fit together. So a cycle, just to wrap up, no matter how discussed, refers from a descent from the highest to the lowest and a return from the lowest to the highest once more, plus whatever may have been gained. So any halfway through a cycle is a turning point, and so HPB is clearly a turning point since Kali Yuga began. if Kali Yuga were divided, it's 432,000 years. If Kali Yuga were divided into 10,000 year cycles, and we called those wheels, there would be 143 wheels to Kali Yuga, 143 great descents of masses of mankind from spirit to the depths of materiality and their return again. So, if we're on a halfway point of a 10,000 year cycle and HPB was a turning point, we can say we've passed the halfway point. We're on an ascending arc of, the cycles are wheels within wheels. So HPB is marking an ascent, which I thought was an important point, a reverse arc. That is, the next 5,000 years will mark for the Aryan race an advance and not a retrogression. HPB inaugurated the return half of the cycle. So we'll end with that, and if there's any questions, I have another handout on the planes and the globes that will help with the rounds, the root and seed manus. Yes?
Yes, to relate this to what this means to us,
Thank you.
View, it's very, very important. If this student understands the process correctly, you said we're both Indian, we're both Chinese, we're virtually everything as that goes. We pass through all these experiences, is that what you're saying? So therefore, we're passing through all of the kingdoms of nature, the experiences of all the kingdoms of nature, if you will, down from the spiritual, purely spiritual, down around to get to lift ourselves up through our self-produced methods, is that correct? Up back to spiritual again. So we are down in the very material phase right now, going through these particular experiences. So we are all of these, but yet we are none of these. Would you say that way?
Yeah, just like the example of Plato is that he being above what happened, it didn't affect him so. He had removed his consciousness from the cause and effect. And that's what the teachers are saying is possible. And to relate this to the progress you mentioned through the different kingdoms, you can see we start with a fish, and a step up from that might be a creature that can move about on land, as a tortoise, to a much more aggressive and stronger kind of animal is a boar. And then the man-lion stage is like half human, half animal. And then a dwarf is supposed to symbolize sort of like the dawning of reason and intellect in man. And then the hero, Rama was a hero. He wasn't perfected, but he was really striving and doing well. And then here he's more perfected, and then we see, perfected beings of different grades. So it seemed that this sort of cycle of the 10 forms of the avatar does relate to the much greater cycle that all beings have this obligatory pilgrimage passing through, the massive egos pass through the stage of the elemental, the mineral, the plant, the animal, and as we are at that critical pivotal point between the worlds of spirit and matter, the man stage. Once one has achieved the man stage, one does not, go backwards in the cycle. But you can see that there's these, wheels within wheels of manvantaras, of different cycles, and ways of sort of symbolically marking them off in a way that is relates to the progress, relates to the state of thought of the beings at that time. And so these can be going on, wheels within wheels, ending of one blends with the beginning of another. It's supremely mathematical, but it's not quite so cut and dried as we tend to think, like that example of the meeting at 6:15. The clock doesn't cause the meeting, it was set at that time, but people start assembling a little bit before that, and people who are already there are starting to leave. So it is precise, but there's the dawns and twilights, the blendings of cycles into cycles, because yes, that's how it works. Spirals within spirals. Yeah.
Going back to the beginning of the talk, where you talked about the Indians,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like our understanding of the Indians was that they were good stewards of the earth. They were very appreciative. In many respects, they were very spiritual beings. And then the Westerners came to settle, did terrible things to the Indians, were very materialistic, were interested in the resources. And so, yet, we're looking at them as a higher race, you know, in terms of being a fourth race disappearing, and then supposedly a higher race coming. And yet, when you take a look at maybe the ethics, I'm not exactly sure because I'm hardly a student of history, but just generally speaking, it seems as though the ethics and standards of what is perceived as maybe the higher race, the fifth race coming in, doesn't really, it's a little incongruous. So the question would be, what then would be the standards, the distinguishing qualities that were the standards of a higher evolvement that would allow supposedly the higher race to snuff out another race. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I understand the question. I guess the fifth race can't be considered higher at that point, because even though the Native Americans are, according to Madame Blavatsky, a remnant of the fourth race, yet they were in harmony with nature, as you said. They exemplified a more, golden way of living, while the fifth race egos that met up with them were in their Kali, their Iron Age, when their lowest tendencies were holding sway over them. So, yeah, you can see these things that look incongruous, but when perhaps you start to think about it, because they were at their highest point, their ascent before they died out, or disappeared, basically amalgamated to the point of disappearance. Most of them were, killed off by disease and so forth. You can see that they can exist at the same time, even though they're in different races, they're in different ages, they can still occupy the same globe. It's said in the article that we altered them to some extent, we as in, the fifth race. Not that any one of us want to identify with the horrible things that happened to the Native Americans. But I think the point of your question is that they had an effect on us too. And, the more we can remember their harmony, their way of life, it shows us something we could learn from. That this learning is not, it's so multifaceted. It's like a jewel where if you tilt it in the light, you see a different face, and it's not so cut and dried. It's immense.
She also says in many articles that Tibet is a special land, that it is sacred and it is very spiritual. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, the student, knows a little bit, but there's probably a lot to be said. It is said that area, that region, was deliberately sort of isolated because the wisdom was fairly untouched there, and that it preserved it you know, during the Dark Ages, it was sort of, you know, secluded from the very sort of depraved way of life and treatment of any thought other than, you know, a very, you know, dogmatic religious thought at the time. So yeah, I think it still, one could say, holds that position. Many avatars and many spiritual teachers come from that area or spent a significant time there. It's where supposedly Shambhala is, the land of the gods, where there is a place undisturbed by the horrors of the age. Is there more you'd like to add to that?
There's a passage from the Secret Doctrine that I was referring to, I didn't know whether you came across it or not, where specifically states that Avalokiteshvara, which is the Tibetan Chenresi, which is the light that comes through into the world through that, incarnates in one of the lamas, Dalai Lama or the Teshu Lama.
Yeah,
So
I
that
did come
Kalki
across that.
avatar perhaps is going to come through that side of nature, because she also says that last avatar is coming at the end of Kali Yuga, and she reminds us this is the beginning of it.
Yes, I did come across that, and you paraphrased it pretty well. I don't want to. I have so many notes. I'm not sure I could put my finger on it, but I did come across that. Another aspect to just sort of complete the picture is that between all these periods of activity are pralayas, are periods of rest equal to the length of the period of manifestation. So there are these pralayas between even small cycles and then the bigger until there's like a cosmic one after the life of Brahma, where everything is withdrawn into the, you know, into the one. And interestingly, it said everything physical, everything on the rupa planes, but the arupa planes, the formless planes, there's nothing to sort of draw back in. They are formless. So perhaps that might give us a clue how there are beings who can remain conscious through those long pralayas and re-emerge at the beginning of a new manvantara to teach the nascent humanity to incarnate, and as Adi and Chohans have done, to lend their principles to mankind. Yeah, continue.
She also tells us that there's only 3 of those primary races on Earth at this time. 3 only.
3 primary races.
The remnants of the 3 primaries. All the rest have disappeared.
Yeah, there's the Aryan, which is the great mass of humanity today, regardless of you know, skin tone or color. And then there's some remnants of the Atlantean and very few remnants from the Lemurian, the 3rd.
Yeah.
Very few. Yeah, the Aborigines and so forth. Question in the back?
I'm intrigued that Blavatsky would have received and recorded the exact time and date of Krishna's death or his passing, as that would relate to symbolizing the beginning of this particular age that we're in. So I want to get that information again. I want to get that exact timing on that,
Sure.
that you quoted. And
It was between the 17th and 18th of February, and the one 3102 BC.
On the Zodiac.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how these cycles are actually traced out. And because HPB is the halfway point of a 10,000 year cycle, you can see that there are ascents in a dark age, just like there's descents in a dark age, and there's ascents, you know, in
Spiritual.
yeah, there's minor periods of a revival of spirituality followed by, you know, an eclipse. So really get the idea of cycles within cycles, that you can be on an ascent even though it's a dark age. I think that's an important point, and the more people thinking of these ideas and what's possible and their power together to change, you know, the thought patterns in the astral light, the more we can do to further, you know, to bring it quicker to the mass of humanity, which is, if we think about how most people live on the globe, it's pretty dark.
I'd like
Huh.
to ask a question. Do you think that the ULTs around the world represent a bit of light in the world?
Definitely. Do the ULTs represent a bit of light in the world? Definitely. She says, or Judge says, that the Mahatmas do not leave any method or opportunity. They don't ignore any opportunity to get this information, whether it's presented like this or in some other way, to humanity. They are not partial to any method or organization. It's universal diffusion, you know, as much as they can in whatever way that they can. You had a follow-up?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question in that wondering how these ages mathematically or zodiacally fit in with the cycle of the sun, because and I think I say cycle because normally your sun, our sun immediately in our particular solar system does basically a 50,000 year cycle around, you know, the point in the sky that it cycles around. So Western-wise, I would imagine most of what has been given is that 50-year cycle, or subdivided into a 20-year, 25-year cycle, has been what has determined the ages or the cycle. When I say ages, quote unquote, and those are broken down into, I think, 2,500 years basically as an age. For example, they might say Western-wise in about 1959, I think the Aquarian age came in.
1902.
1902, okay.
Yeah, approximately.
Okay. So given these ages, the golden ages being 1.7, the silver age 1.2 million, there must be another sort of central point, a star system, a constellation, maybe not in our immediate area, but in another part of the galaxy, that's central to that time frame mathematically. Just curious about that.
Yeah, the zodiac is a calendar. And just to, well, because of our time, we'll finish up with this, is it said using the zodiac for the purpose of considering the question of the ages, we find that, roughly speaking, the time taken by the sun to go around the whole circle of its orbiting, you know, a greater spiritual center is 25,800 years, which is a sidereal cycle, the time for the sun to go through all those constellations that the zodiac represents. And that's shown by the retrograde movement of the equinoctial points. This is the type for the yearly cycle, and where we get our 4 seasons. The 4 seasons are also a cycle similar to the 4 ages. Their length will be in proportion to the greater swing of the sun, because everything in the solar system relates to the sun. It's our spiritual center, so to speak, the central star. Among the seasons, the winter corresponds to the Kali age. For then all is turned hard and cold, the light of the spiritual sun being dimmed, the hardness and coldness of materiality appear in the moral life. Now, if the sidereal period be divided by 4, we have the figure of 6,450 years, or approximately that 5,000-year period with the requisite twilight or dawn added to it. And it was taught by the Egyptians that with every quarter of the circle of the sun's great path, that there were changes caused physically by the alteration of the poles, and spiritually there must be changes due to the inner development of the human race as an entirety. While the materialistic philosopher thinks the changes would be due to the movement of the poles, the teaching from the Lodge is that the spiritual inner changes cause the physical ones through the appropriate means. In this case, those means are the movements of the great heavenly bodies. This is because the whole cosmos is on the same grand plan, with all its parts working together, each in its own way. And we'll end with that.
And where does that come from?
This comes from the Madame Blavatsky, The Path, November 1894. And the title is called, I think it's an article called Kali Yuga. There's also a question and answer between a student and the sage called Kali Yuga, the Present Age, which was Path 1888. That is really enlightening for reading about understanding the age we're in, its limitations, and its opportunities. So thank you very much. Yeah, it was a lot. Didn't mean to go so overtime. And then next week is next week is the mystery of individuality. December 9th. Today is following a study class on the Gita.
Those joining us on YouTube, we meet every Sunday. We meet every Sunday at 11 a.m. at 4865A Cordell Avenue here in Bethesda, Maryland. Or you can get more information about the Wisdom of the Ages and the Secret Doctrine, Universal Theosophy at www.ultdc.org. Thank you.
The yellow? Yes.